The last word of Captain Eva Rostova's final entry lost did not so much end as dissolve, its faint echo swallowed by the profound and absolute silence of the tomb ship. It left a vacuum on the bridge of the Endeavor, a void that pulled at the air in Kael's lungs, at the thoughts in his head, at the very foundation of his world. The light from the holographic log flickered once, twice, then died, plunging the command deck back into the spectral gloom of emergency lighting. Red light bled over chrome consoles and crystalline gross, painting the dead crew strapped into their stations in shades of dried blood and damnation. Pressure. He knew pressure. He had lived his life by its metrics, measured its crushing force in atmospheres and decibars, felt it try to buckle the hull of his submersible and turn his bones to powder. He had thought the abyss was the ultimate expression of weight, of an indifferent universe bearing down on a single point. He was wrong. The pressure of 1,000 atmospheres was nothing compared to the weight of one lie. This lie. A lie so vast, so all-encompassing. It had defined every breath he'd taken since birth. The war was a lie. The Xenomorphids were not alien invaders. They were a tool. A terrestrial terraforming agent, repurposed as a boogeyman to unify humanity under the iron fist of the Terrene Hegemony. The colonies on Mars weren't a promise. They were a cage for the compliant. The contribution cycle wasn't a path to salvation. It was a grinder, designed to chew up the desperate and spit out soldiers, to fight a war that was never meant to be won. Some wars are fought to be lost. Rostova's words hammered in his skull, a frantic, repeating drumbeat against the inside of his helmet. Every sacrifice, every death, every piece of hegemony propaganda that promised a glorious victory for the good of all mankind. It was all smoke. It was all a carefully constructed stage play performed on a graveyard the size of a solar system. His dishonorable discharge, the memory a raw septic wound that had never properly healed, flashed behind his eyes. The mission that went sideways. The men he'd lost. The official report that had painted him as incompetent, reckless. Had it been incompetence? Or had his squad been just another acceptable loss? Another calculated expenditure in a war that fed on failure? The bitterness that had been his constant companion for years was suddenly reforged, sharpened from a dull ache of resentment into the pristine, surgical edge of pure hatred. It was so clean, so focused, it almost felt like peace. He could feel his own breathing, loud and ragged in the confines of his helmet. The rhythmic hiss and click of the suit's recycler, a counterpoint to the frantic pounding in his ears. His gloved hand, resting on the edge of the log console, trembled. The metal was cold, a deep, seeping cold that felt like it was leaching the warmth from his very marrow. He could smell the ozone tang of dying electronics and the sterile, metallic scent of the recycled air in his suit. But beneath it, a phantom smell asserted itself, the coppery stench of blood and the faint, cloying sweetness of decay. The ghosts of this bridge were starting to feel very real. A choked sob cut through the silence. It was Jax. The kid was on his knees, his helmet pressed against the deck plating as if he were trying to push himself through the very floor of the ship. His body was racked with shudders, not the violent convulsions of his linker episodes, but the deep, soul-shaking tremors of abject terror. He was feeling it, not just hearing the words, but experiencing the psychic residue of the Endeavor's last moments. The agony of a crew discovering their entire lives, their entire cause, was a monstrous fabrication, followed by the terror of their final, futile stand. Jax. Sloane's voice was a strained whisper over the comm, thick with a horror that mirrored his own. She moved toward the boy, her steps heavy, leaden, as if wading through something thick and invisible. She knelt beside him, placing a hand on his shoulder. The gesture was meant to be comforting, but Jax flinched away, scrambling back a few inches. "They knew," Jax rasped, his voice thin and reedy. At the end, she knew. They were coming for her. Not the Xenos. Us. Our ships. They were coming to bury the truth. His head snapped up, his wide, terrified eyes finding Kael's through the 2 layers of reinforced visor. They're still listening. They always listen. The paranoia of a psychic, or the grim reality of their situation. Kael's mind, finally kicking back into gear, shoved aside the crushing weight of revelation and focused on tactical reality. Survival. 1 second at a time. Jax was right. Standard military comms were a sieve. Command on the lunar outpost would have logged their unauthorized expedition to the crash site. They were already ghosts, their files flagged, their actions being scrutinized. Disobeying a direct order was bad enough. Finding a derelict ghost ship from the Hegemony's lost fleet was a complication that would get them quarantined indefinitely. Finding what they just found, that was a death sentence. There would be no trial, no penal colony, just a quiet, efficient erasure. Sloane. Kael's voice was rough, like gravel scraped over steel. He had to force the word out. The log data. Is it self-contained in that console? Sloane looked up from Jax, her face pale and drawn behind her visor. The defiant idealism he'd seen in her before was gone, replaced by a profound, hollowed-out shock. She was a doctor, a healer. Her entire purpose was to fix what was broken, to save lives. How do you heal a wound this deep? How do you save people from a lie that has become their reality? I think so, she stammered, pushing herself to her feet and moving back to the console. Her movements were stiff, robotic. The power cell is localized. The rest of the ship's network is dead. It's an old-school, hard-wired system. A black box. Redundant, isolated. She ran a gloved hand over the console's interface, her medical training giving her a familiarity with complex systems. The data core is here. She tapped a recessed panel. It's shielded. We could remove it. Do it, Kael ordered. The command came out with an authority he hadn't felt in years. It was the ghost of his old self, the officer, taking control, because someone had to. Now, as Sloane worked, her fingers surprisingly nimble despite her state of shock, Kael turned his attention to the bridge's viewport. It was a gaping maw, shattered and torn, offering a perfect, silent view of the lunar landscape. The gray, pockmarked plains stretched out to a horizon, crowned by the gentle curve of Earth, a serene blue and white marble hanging in the blackness. Home, the seat of the Terrene Hegemony, the heart of the lie. It looked so peaceful from here. He imagined the sprawling arcologies, the billions of people living out their lives in the contribution cycle, praying for a ticket to Mars, hating the alien menace that kept them from paradise. They were all slaves on a plantation, worshipping the master who'd convinced them. The walls were there for their own protection. A new light began to blink on his suit's heads-up display. An incoming transmission. Priority channel. It was Lieutenant Valerius, their commanding officer, back at the outpost. Kael's blood ran cold. He let it blink. Answering it was a trap. Not answering it was an admission of guilt. Every second that passed was another shovelful of dirt on their own graves. Kael, Sloane said, her voice tight with effort. The core is locked in. It's a physical security clamp. I can't override it without a command key, which is probably on the captain's corpse. Kael looked over at the command chair. Captain Rostova was still strapped in, her desiccated form a silent monument to the truth she had died to protect. Her head was slumped to one side, the skin of her face pulled taut over her skull. A single crystalline shard, like a frozen tear, was embedded in the console just beside her. Still gloved hand approaching her felt like sacrilege, like disturbing a saint's tomb. But they had no choice. He moved toward the chair, his mag boots clanking with grim finality on the deck. The air around the captain felt colder, heavier. He could see the details of her flight suit, the hegemony insignia on the shoulder, the stylized eagle clutching a terraformed Mars, now a symbol of profound mockery. He reached out, his fingers brushing against the utility belt around her waist. There, a small metallic data key clipped securely in place. His fingers hesitated. This was Eva Rostova, the woman whose voice had just torn his universe apart. She wasn't just a casualty anymore. She was a martyr. Taking this key felt like robbing her. She wanted the truth out. A voice in his head, his own, argued with savage clarity. She died for it. Don't let it die with her. He unclipped the key. It felt warm in his palm, a stark contrast to the cold of the bridge. As his hand pulled away, his gauntlet brushed against hers. Her fingers were rigid, locked into a claw-like shape. Beneath his touch, the delicate bones shifted with a dry, rustling sound, like autumn leaves skittering across pavement. A shudder ran through him, involuntary, and deep. He backed away, the key held tight in his fist. "Here," he said, extending it to Sloane. The priority call alert was still blinking, a persistent, accusatory red eye in the corner of his vision. They had seconds, maybe a minute, before Valerius would send an armed team of enforcers to render assistance. Sloane took the key, her gaze lingering on Kael for a moment. He saw a flicker of something in her eyes, not just fear, but a dawning, terrible understanding of their predicament. She understood. They were no longer soldiers. They were witnesses, and the hegemony did not suffer witnesses to live. She inserted the key. With a soft chime and the hiss of pneumatics, the security clamp retracted. Sloane carefully worked the data core free. It was a dense metallic brick, no larger than his fist, surprisingly heavy. It hummed with a faint, latent energy. The truth condensed into a palm-sized object. It felt heavier than the entire ship. "Got it," she breathed, holding it up. "Valerius is still calling," Kael stated, the obvious hanging between them like an executioner's axe. "He'll have our location triangulated. They'll be here in minutes. What do we do?" Sloane asked, her voice trembling as she clutched the core to her chest. "We can't fight them. We can't run. Where would we go? Where would they go?" The moon was a hegemony stronghold. Ganymede, Jupiter, the belt, it was all hegemony territory. Earth was the lion's den. Mars was a gilded cage. There was nowhere. They were adrift in a sea of enemies who wore the same uniform they did. Kael's mind raced, his salvager's instincts kicking in, searching for an angle, a flaw in the steel, a way to leverage the impossible. They couldn't go back to the outpost. They couldn't stay here. They needed a third option. An insane option. His eyes fell upon the dead ship around them. The Endeavor. Charred, pitted, broken, but it had systems. Emergency power was on. Rostova's log mentioned the Xenos had disabled their main drive, but not destroyed it entirely. The crystalline growth that covered the ship. Rostova's log had said the hegemony ships were vulnerable to the Xenos' bioelectric field, that had shorted out their advanced systems. But this ship had survived a direct assault, had traveled through that impossible rift, and still had enough power to run a bridge log. For who knows how long, an idea, cold and terrible and magnificent, began to form. "Jax," Kael said, turning to the kid who was now huddled against a bulkhead, watching them with haunted eyes. "The ship. What do you feel from it?" Jax shook his head. "Pain. So much. Fear. But underneath, it's quiet. It's sleeping. The crystals, they're part of it now. They aren't just on the hull. They're in the hull. Woven into the systems. Like scar tissue. Like a new kind of nerve. Scar tissue, a new kind of nerve." The Xenos hadn't just attacked the ship they had, in their own alien way. Changed it. "Sloane, your medical scanner." Kael barked. "Scan the crystals." What's their energy signature? Sloane, startled by his sudden intensity, fumbled for the scanner on her belt. She aimed it at a thick lattice of the crystalline growth that had burst through a nearby console, its facets glowing faintly in the red emergency light. The scanner whirred, its screen filling with data. I don't know what I'm looking at, she said, her voice a mixture of confusion and awe. There's a massive bioelectric potential. It's not just inert crystal. It's conductive. It's channeling the ship's ambient energy, rerouting it, creating a closed circuit. It's like a biological power conduit. That was it, the impossible answer. The hegemony ships were vulnerable to the Xenos' field because their technology was too clean, too precise. The Xenus had inadvertently hardened the Endeavor. They'd broken it, but in the process, they had given it a crude, biological immunity. The rift, Kael breathed, the plan solidifying in his mind. Jax, you said it was a hole in the sky, a tear in the gravity field. Can you still feel it? Jax closed his eyes, his brow furrowing in concentration. He lifted a trembling hand, pointing not at the viewport, but at a spot on the navigation console. It's not gone, it's just closed. The edges are still there. It's like a wound that's scabbed over. It's weak. Can we open it? Kael pressed, his heart hammering against his ribs. With what? Sloane demanded, looking at him as if he were insane. The main drive is out. The reactor is probably cracked. This ship is a coffin. No, Kael countered, his gaze sweeping across the dead bridge. It's not a coffin. It's a key. The hegemony built it, but the Xenos rebuilt it. We don't need the main drive. We just need a focused burst of energy. A massive, directed shock. Enough to tear that scab back open. He pointed to a series of conduits near the main engineering line. If we can overload the secondary power systems and channel that surge through the deflector array, if the crystals can handle the load without shattering. It was a salvager's gambit, a desperate patchwork fix using broken parts and a prayer. It was insane. It was suicidal. And it was their only chance. Even if we could do that, Sloane argued, her voice rising with frantic disbelief. What's on the other side? We don't know where that rift leads. I know exactly where it leads, Kael said, his voice dropping to a low. It leads away from here, away from them. He gestured with his head toward the blinking comms light, which now seemed to scream their impending doom. Rostova's fleet was looking for the Xeno homeworld. Maybe they found it. Maybe they found something else. It doesn't matter. Any hell is better than the one we know is coming for us. And we take the ship, we take the truth, and we run. Silence descended again, but this time it was different. It wasn't the silence of shock. It was the silence of a decision hanging in the balance. The weight of it was immense, a fulcrum upon which their lives and perhaps the future of the entire human race, now rested. Sloane stared at him, her eyes wide. She looked at the data core in her hands, the physical proof of the grandest betrayal in history. Then she looked at Jax, huddled and broken. Her duty as a doctor was to preserve life. And Kael, in his madness, was offering the only path, however narrow and dark, that led to it. She gave a single, sharp nod. Okay, tell me what to do. A new alert pinged on Kael's HUD, a proximity warning. A single hegemony dropship, detaching from the outpost. Enforcers. Valerius hadn't even waited for them to refuse the call. The hunt was already on. They had minutes, maybe less. Sloane, get to engineering. Kael commanded, the officer fully in control now. I'll route the schematics to your datapad. Find the primary energy regulators for the secondary power core and disable all the safety protocols. Everything. I want it primed to blow the second I give the word. He turned to Jax. I need you with me, kid. On the navigation console. You're our eyes. Guide the energy surge. You have to feel where the rift is weakest. You're the only one who can aim this thing. He strode to the pilot's station, the captain's chair, and laid his hands on the controls. They were cold and dead for now. Let's wake the dead, he said, his voice a low promise in the silent tomb. The war he'd been fighting his whole life was a lie. The real war, the one for the truth, was just beginning.